Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first Data for Good webinar. My name is Richard Doe, and I will be your moderator today. So this is a series of webinars that we'll use to highlight key learnings and achievements of the Data for Good project. And we'll be discussing some of the successes and challenges that we faced while implementing the project in Ghana. And we're exploring how other countries and cultures can use these lessons and apply them in their localities. So our hope is to inspire national statistical offices worldwide to use these insights when implementing similar projects in their own countries. So you are all very welcome again to the webinar. I'll quickly introduce our speakers now. These are the key people who will be contributing to our discussion. And in no particular order, please give a quick wave when I mention your name. Omar Seidu, who's the head of demographic statistics and SDGs coordinator at the Ghana Statistical Office. We also have Angela Mensah Poku, who's the commercial and digital operations director at Vodafone Ghana. And also with us is Kathy Riley, who's the senior partnerships director at Flowminder Foundation. And last but not least, we have Professor Samuel Kobineni, who is the government statistician at the Ghana Statistical Office. Welcome, all of you. We'll start with a short welcome address by Professor Samuel Kobineni. And over to you, Prof.
Good morning, distinguished participants. It is a great pleasure to host you to this webinar session where Ghana Statistical Service seeks to share with you our experiences around the use of mobile data. We started conversations around mobile data a couple of years before the pandemic hit all of us as a global community. And when it hit us in Ghana, we thought of how Ghana Statistical Service can make itself more relevant. And indeed, what we did was to use core detail records based on our partnership with Flowminder and Vodafone to see how we can help the government track mobility of persons following the lockdown restrictions that we faced in our respective countries. It was so relevant to the government that at some point the president personally said to us that we contributed to their achievement in tracking how their lockdown restrictions were effective. Going forward, we have institutionalized the use of mobile data as part of our regular engagement, and by so doing, we're going to see how core detail records can help us assess issues around health and disaster management. As National Statistics Office, we should always keep in mind that our primary goal is not data production. Our primary goal is coordinating activities within the national statistical system. And what that means is that we shouldn't restrict our engagement with only government, but more importantly, restrict our engagement with other stakeholders like CSOs, like private sector, like we did in the case of collaborating with a teleco to get their core detail records to inform the official statistics that we do. So that collaboration is critical in the modernization and transformation agenda that we seek to achieve. When we talk about challenges that are facing us on the continent as National Statistics Office, the traditional challenges still persist, but we should continue to keep our mandate going on in the sense that we can surmount the challenges that we are facing if we have the right collaborations. I do appreciate the fact that we have challenges around capacity, we have challenges around infrastructure, we have challenges around recognition, but the only way we can surmount these challenges is that we make our relevance known by government by continuously getting to work with policymakers in a way that they would feel that we understand what they are doing and we are providing them with the right data. One of the activities that we're doing at Ghana Statistical Service is to ensure that we have a good sense of all the policy documents across the government ministries, departments, and agencies. We're even going to the extent of getting a sense of how private businesses, CSOs, and NGOs would want to grow, they want to develop themselves over the period, and ask ourselves whether we are providing them with the right data. So from my point of view, what we should do as statistical offices is to enhance our working relationship with policymakers, with private sector operators, with civil society organizations, and get them to feel that the data that we have can help solve the challenges. We should recognize that we live in a world of complex economic challenges, social challenges, and these challenges on a continuous basis continue to manifest in different forms. And the only way we can keep up to the manifestation of the different challenges is harnessing the different non-traditional data sources, which are high-frequency data sources, which are very comprehensive, which do not come at the cost that we incur when we are doing surveys and censuses. And the only way out, as I've indicated severally, is collaboration, is partnership. And we are hoping that we're going to change our mindset of working in silos as National Statistics Office and ensure that we collaborate, get access to data, and on a regular basis interpret the data in a way that responds to the needs of different stakeholders. I hope that this session will be instructive. I hope that we're going to sustain it. We're going to share our best practices across the different NSOs, and then as a continent, we're going to keep up with what is needed from the national statistical system in our respective countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your opening remarks. We are now moving to the core of the webinar, where we'll hear from the various actors in the partnership to understand their approach, the lessons learned, etc., as an introduction to setting up mobile data initiatives. But first, it's worth spending a little bit of time explaining exactly what data for good is. So for that, I'll turn to Omar. Omar, what is data for good? Why does it exist? And who's involved in it?
Yeah, Data for Good is a partnership between three key institutions. Ghana Statistical Service, coming from the public sector, Vodafone Ghana, coming from the private sector, and Flowminder Foundation, which is a technical institution with the skills and knowledge to analyze the data from the telecom sector. Now, this partnership has been made possible through funding from Hewlett Foundation and Vodafone Foundation. And it is basically to provide an opportunity to leverage telecom data to inform policies and decisions in Ghana. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much for that, Omar. And let's give the floor to Kathy. Kathy, I'd like to take a minute to fully understand some of the concepts that are involved in this project. For example, the partnership is about integrating mobile operator data into official statistics, right? And particularly mobility estimates that you get from call detail records. So what exactly are those?
Okay, thanks very much. Call detail records are the information that gets generated when anybody uses their phone to send a text or make a call or use the internet. It is information that is usually collected for billing purposes by mobile network operators, and it contains information within it that is useful and can be mined. So the way it works is when you use your phone, it connects to a cell tower nearby you usually, and that gives us information about the time and the location at which a particular event occurs. And what we're talking about with mining core detail records, or understanding them and aggregating them, is we're taking the information about how populations are moving between the cell towers of a particular mobile network operator's network and seeing the patterns of movement of those populations between origin and destination cell towers. We're not tracking the individuals. We're not looking at GPS data for individual phones. What we're doing is utilizing and understanding the timestamp and the location data of the cell towers and the time at which the event occurred. And we're using that to understand how populations are moving.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. And back to Omar for a minute. Omar, can you tell us briefly why mobility estimates are important? Why do governments need timely access to mobility data for the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, thank you very much. The Sustainable Development Goals is about the aspirations of the people, and achieving the aspirations of the people depends largely on how governments are able to provide services that meet the needs of these people. National statistical offices globally have the mandate around providing data to inform policies and programs of the government, of the private sector, and the citizenry. And statistical offices, especially in the global south, conduct censuses once every 10 years to provide more comprehensive data, and that also serves as the denominator or for a lot of indicators that are usually computed. However, we understand that population is not static. People move across different geographies every day, every time. And so it is important that at any point in time, you have some clearer understanding of how many people are in some geographical locations. For instance, for disaster management, when there is disaster in a particular location at a certain time of the day, our traditional data systems will just give you an estimate that there's this population in this district within the year. But different days and different times of the day, different numbers are in those locations. And so what mobility estimate can do is to provide you a more reliable or accurate data on the densities or the numbers of people, estimated numbers of people in each of these locations at any point in time. And also, for instance, for public health emergencies, you always need to have that clear understanding of how many people you have to serve with a particular intervention. A mobility estimate will provide you the opportunity to understand what is the population that you have to serve in different locations. That is how important mobility estimates are. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that, Omar. So Angela, now to you. Vodafone Ghana played a really important role in this partnership. And in fact, it's the very first of its kind in Ghana and Africa, right? So what is the value of this project for Vodafone Ghana and the people of Ghana?
Okay, thank you very much. For us, it was very clear. It aligns with Vodafone Ghana's purpose, which is around digital inclusion, using digital communication and its byproducts for the good of the society, community, and for the nation. So it fits very, very well with that. And we obviously support the SDGs. So there's that synergy there as well. For us, it was important because the use cases actually benefit Ghanaian citizenry. So when you look at all the use cases, whether it's tracking Ebola, cholera, and the big one, which was COVID-19, these are things that not only have an impact globally, but also locally. So there's the importance of using data and scientific methods to be able to drive decision-making and making improvement for the citizens of Ghana. So for us, it was really a no-brainer.
All right, thank you for that input, Angela. Now back to you for a moment, Kathy. I understand that Flowminder is a non-profit organization and you specialize in the use of CDRs, among other things. And you actually pioneered the use of anonymized CDR data to estimate population distribution and movements and for natural disasters and disease outbreaks. So in a nutshell, what would you say are the core components of a mobile data initiative? What are the elements you should consider when you are implementing something like this?
Okay, so there are a number of different components to a successful mobile data partnership. Key to setting the whole thing up is the governance and the legal framework. And that is actually something that we've spent a lot of time investing in. There's also the infrastructure. You need hardware, you need software, you need ways of collecting and crunching the data. And so that's a key component too, and getting that set up and installing it and making it functional and maintaining it is also a core part of it. There are components around the skills that people need to understand the data that's coming out, to understand how to utilize it, to aggregate it, how to access the data, how to authorize that access, and then how to process it in ways that protect privacy and maintain data protection requirements, but also provide the information that is possible from this data. So ways in terms of releasing the data, agreeing how that's going to occur and what the approvals processes are like, are also part of the business processes of the initiative. And then there's also things around sustainability and how to make it occur. How is it going to be funded? How are you going to maintain it after funding from a particular donor or funding source might end? And there are different models for this, some of them being trialed at the moment with regard to how you might be able to support that through a user pays principle, or others where you're looking at the donor community to support an initiative, or in the case here where different partners are contributing their components, so in-kind and financial contribution. There are different models that you can look to in this kind of mobile data partnership.
All right. Thank you for those insights, Kathy. And now let's hear from Omar about the role of national statistical offices in a public-private partnership such as this one. Omar, what role do NSOs such as the Ghana Statistical Service play in opening access to privately produced data?
Yes, the Sustainable Development Goals recognize that our ability as a global community to achieve the SDGs lies strongly in building partnerships. So to that extent, goal 17 of the 17 goals in the SDGs is about partnerships. And this particular project is actually a demonstration of what we can achieve together through partnership, public-private partnership. And so GSS at the beginning did an assessment of our capacity as a country to monitor the SDGs. And we had a realization that we could not monitor many of the SDG targets. And so with the support of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, we convened a data roadmap that came out with 3 key priority areas that we need to focus on. And one of them was to leverage non-traditional data to close data gaps that exists. And this is one of the opportunities we had to work with Vodafone Ghana, leverage the data that they have to provide some insights and help monitor the SDGs. And so for the National Statistical Office, by the mandate, we have the responsibility to ensure that data are provided to monitor national programs and to feed into policies and programs. And if our traditional data systems are unable to do that, we have to think outside the box. We have to think of leveraging other data systems that can give us the opportunity to meet this mandate or to satisfy the requirements of the National Statistical Offices.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for that input, Omar. And right now, I'd like for Angela and Kathy to comment a little bit about the implementation of the project in Ghana. What went right? What were the things that were easy to implement, and what was easier than expected, for example? So we'll hear from Angela first, and then Kathy, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure. What went right? This was a labor of love over multiple years, and I think that we have to acknowledge that it took commitment, it took relationship to get to where we are now. So I think that definitely leverage off the learnings that we went through to try and shortcut those many years. But I think that what is important is to have expert people who are knowledgeable about what they do. We mentioned it's a partnership, and that's exactly it. Everybody understood what they brought to the table. And we're really fortunate that we partnered with people that were passionate and professional around their area of expertise. So when you look at Flowminder knew exactly how to implement this and were open to making changes or adapting based on the Ghana use case, but having a strong partner that understood what was possible and also was able to hold our hands through the journey was phenomenal. And then you've got GSS, who were very, very clear about the multiple use cases that the data could be used for. And especially in the Ghana context and in nation building and making decision making decisions for Ghana government, having GSS and their input and their insight was invaluable. So for us, it was really, really important to have the right people with the right knowledge, playing the right role in the partnership. So I'd say that, and then again, having very strong governance and a very strong steerco. So we have a very strong steerco whereby we form, storm, norm, have discussions about new partners or new use cases, and everyone's very, very open-minded. Even when we challenge each other, we know that the greater good is what we collectively agreed on. So I think those were the things that really, really worked well.
Kathy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just building on what Angela said, I think it's really true that relationships are a key part of the ingredient, and I don't quite know how to say here are the ingredients you can just pick and choose. It's about building those relationships, right? So you can't necessarily know from the beginning that it's going to work, but it's about cultivating and nurturing good relationships and trust. I think that's a key component as well, that we've been able to build trust. And I think the investment that went into building the legal framework that has enabled us to have the partnership agreement we have in place is a key way in which that occurred. It's kind of a byproduct of those long, in-depth conversations and getting it right at the start as the foundation for the partnership. So that's one kind of component. I do think there's something around the different parties genuinely believing in what they're doing and in the potential for it to actually have impact. It's taken us a long time to get to the point where we can start to see these use cases that Angela's talking about. And this year, we're incredibly hopeful of really being able to demonstrate that in a big way. We did see it in COVID, and that was a huge success and an achievement. And we want to see it grow and expand into different sectors. So we're looking at health and disaster management and the applications there in particular. I do think a key component for us in terms of ingredients for success has also been the investment. You need money to do this stuff. And so having the resources from Hewlett Foundation and Vodafone Foundation really did allow us to have the seed funding and then additional support to spend the time and have the human resource that Angela's referred to committed to the project. So those are some of the things. It wasn't necessarily always easy, but I think those are some of the ingredients for success that we can point to.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy and Angela. And Omar, I wonder whether we can look at the flip side of that. What were some of the challenges and points of friction, any surprises that came up during the project?
Yes, friction, not really. If you look at where we started from, you'd see that every immediate challenge provided an opportunity for us to learn and course correct. And for instance, when we started, and we started right with the regulators around the table, there was the question that was thrown at us. Why do you need to bring Flowminder to process data in Ghana when you are the National Statistical Office with a mandate to do that? And that was not something that we're expecting when the regulator brought that in a meeting. And so you realize that both Vodafone Ghana and GSS were, how do we deal with this? But then it was clear that the GSS did not have the capacity to analyze CDRs. And so we had to clearly communicate that. And Vodafone came up strongly also to support the fact that even in their case, they also needed some level of capacity to support the entire project. And so that, for instance, was a challenge that was thrown to us, but it helped us to now better articulate why we need to work with Flowminder to do this work.
Okay, thank you so much, Omar. Kathy, do you have anything to add to that?
In terms of challenges, I think we've had
yes.
So one of the challenges has been infrastructural in terms of the data flow, the data pipeline, and occasional breakages. And this has occurred for a number of different reasons. And some of the time we've struggled to even know that it's occurred. So we've detected it a bit late. And so backfilling the data from those pipeline gaps, we've learned lessons along the way. And as a result, we actually were able to introduce new clauses to an updated partnership agreement that helps us to figure out how we can ensure that there's a faster turnaround time in terms of making sure that the data is A, being monitored on our side, and B, we're communicating when there might be an issue and working with Vodafone Ghana to resolve whatever the issue is. That's one challenge we've experienced and learned along the way about escalation mechanisms and service level agreements and how we're going to handle that. I think another challenge, and I've mentioned legal agreements already, really is the time it took and the sense of kind of, this is really delayed, or this is really a heavy investment, and this kind of feeling that it should have been done by now and it should have been faster. Is also there and has been a challenge. And also people are really busy, right? Everybody who's involved in these projects has their regular day job that they need to be getting on with. And so finding the time and coping with the additional workload of trying a new innovation, exploring a new way of doing something has also been a challenge. I'd say the NSO in particular, Ghana Statistical Service, and I'm sure others from statistical officers were, attest to the fact that they're really busy. They've got census activity, survey activity, lots of different things that are incredibly important to the country and for which methodologies are known and processes are in place, and they need to be giving those their attention. So finding the time and energy to put towards a new innovative thing that needs still a lot of work is a challenge, but is one that we've worked through together, and that is how we've really managed to build some of these relationships and the trust that we've been talking about earlier. Yeah.
Great. So Angela, were there any challenges from Vodafone's point of view?
I think for us, it was, because this was a new area for us, it was really trying to navigate how far we could push our own internal governance around data protection for our own consumers and our own customers. And I think that this was around the time that GDPR was coming out. So it was very helpful, but also I think it highlighted how many different stakeholders needed to be taken on the journey and the ability to get them to buy into the vision. I think the stakeholder management in this was phenomenal, and trying to paint that picture of what the future could look like can be quite abstract if you've never done it before. So when you're talking to Ghana government, when you're talking to the Data Protection Agency, when you're talking to our regulators, the NCA, when you're talking to all those disparate stakeholders, it's important to be really, really clear and illustrate why, how, and within the confines of how you're using this data. So I think that was challenging. Not everybody knows what you're talking about is one of the things that you can't assume. And internally, making sure that customer data is safe, secure, and we're not putting our customers at risk or something internally, that was foremost in our minds.
Okay. Thank you. Great points there, everyone. Now let's talk about, still on the subject of challenges, let's talk about policy and regulation. So Omar, was it really challenging for GSS to obtain support? And by that, I mean regulatory approval. And how did you do it?
Yeah, that was challenging, but as has already been said by Kathy and Angela, it was very important that we had clarity on what we were going out for. And right from the word go, we began with the engagement with the regulator and the Data Protection Commission. And so they had some kind of a sense of what we wanted to do. Whilst it took us a longer than expected time to have the final agreement signed, and also getting the final okay from the Data Protection Commission, These will turn out to be opportunities for us, especially when we're entering the second phase, development of the agreement in the second phase. One other area that I would want to touch on is many national statistical offices in the Global South in particular do not have legal departments. And we had this as a big issue. So when we had to work on these agreement and all that, that required legal minds. Eventually, we had to fall on the Ministry of Finance legal department, who did a great job by providing the legal context of all the things that needed to be done. And that was something that helped us to move the process quicker. Another area that is worth touching on is knowing the potential of this data and what misinformation could eventually create. We decided to take it up with political leadership as well, right from the word go, where we presented this project to the high-level ministerial committee on the SDGs. And I recall that then the Attorney General asked a number of questions just to be sure that this was not going to infringe on the rights and the privacy of the population. And with that clarity, they were very happy for us to proceed with this. And I think these are some of the things that made it easy to overcome the potential roadblocks that we would have had from regulation, from the regulators and from policymakers.
All right. Thank you so much, Omar. And moving on to Kathy. Can you tell us a little bit about data security and access and the technical setup? How did it work and how secure was it?
Yeah, sure. I've mentioned already infrastructure, the hardware and the software. So Vodafone Foundation actually supported the procurement and delivery of the existing hardware that is sitting at the data center of Vodafone Ghana. And everything that occurs in processing the data is behind the firewalls of the MNO, and that's standard procedure for Flowminder. We've installed some software that we've produced that helps with the, if you like, data crunching, the aggregation of the data, and that software is known as FlowKit, and FlowKit is installed on that server, and it's what processes the already pseudonymized data that comes to us from the Vodafone servers. So there's already a step that occurs there in terms of data protection and individual privacy. And then what happens is that FlowKit as a piece of software runs on the data, these vast numbers of data points, and aggregates the information so that at the end of the day, the thing that is outputted and comes out from Vodafone Ghana and is shared with Ghana Statistical Service for use in official statistics is aggregated information. It's not possible to disaggregate and get down to the individual level again. And we do have certain steps that we take as well, like redacting where there's too few numbers of subscribers in a particular data set. We will remove those. So we've got some redaction processes. And then in terms of like approvals and authorizations and restrictions, there are a number of different steps we had to take as well, codified in the legal agreement that's been mentioned for the partnership, around having a security plan, having detection measures and backups, being super clear what staff obligations are with regard to access to data, having strong restrictions on what those are and clear steps for approvals by Vodafone Ghana of who has access to what on the server. And the principle of data minimization is followed, right? Where only those who absolutely need to have access do, and those who don't are restricted from it. So you've got the technology, you've got the access control side of things, and the Vodafone group minimum security requirements that are cascaded down to us as a service provider, technical support service are part of that. And then you've got things like when the data's, the aggregates are being shared and stored, those are also encrypted. So there's a number of different ways in which security provisions are put in place and upheld by the partnership.
That's great. Angela, could you speak a little more about security and how the data was treated before it was shared?
Sure. I think Kathy did a great job to explain end to end. Just to add that, there are security measures going in and going out. So there's a secure VPN that we use before for our partners to access into our platforms and our systems and our environment. And then we've also got our firewall, which the Flow Kit sits behind. Everything is processed, as Kathy said, on premise, so we don't send anything out. Once data is aggregated and anonymized, we actually check the data before it leaves. So no data goes out without key personnel actually checking what data is going out. Not interrogating, but just checking that there isn't anything that doesn't need to go out. And then when it's accessed on the other side, it's accessed through another secure VPN. So from a security point of view, we've got our own internal Vodafone Ghana systems and expectations, and then we work with Flowminder and GSS to ensure that those are instilled. But then also from a steerco point of view, we're very, very clear about what the partners are signing up for. So everything that Kathy said is actually in writing, very clear. Everyone knows what the expectation is. And if there is any change to that, it has to be agreed at the steerco level. So it's very robust, it's documented, and it's very concise.
That sounds very robust. Kathy, I know you've probably spoken a little about it already, but I'd love for you to go a little more into detail about the nature of the data that is released later on. What happens to the data before it goes out?
So the call detail records that I mentioned that are part of the billing records produced for Vodafone Ghana subscribers, this information gets aggregated and processed in a way that it's following, if you like, certain recipes, certain methodologies that have been used to identify ways in which you can build a particular mobility indicator. So it might be origin destination matrices, which give you an idea of where people are moving to and from. We're working on methodologies around defining the dynamic denominator of a particular geography, a particular bounded area, like a district, so that we'd be able to identify, taking inflows and outflows into account and other population information, what's the change in population over time, as Omar mentioned earlier, in terms of density of population. So there are different ways in which the data gets processed to provide different indicators. And what's happening at the moment is that those indicators, we have a pre-approved list that is clear with Vodafone Ghana, what we're going to be doing with the data and how it's going to be processed. We also have a mechanism for agreeing additions to that list. And those are produced running on the data and sent to GSS through an API that they can access. They're able to set parameters. They might have a particular query about a certain time frame where they want to run a particular aggregate. So the recipe is there, the data is there, they specify the parameters, and they generate the information that they're looking for. That's the way it currently is working. And down the road, GSS are going to be working with other ministries, departments, and agencies to get that data into use in those different sectors like health or disaster management, etc.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Angela, do you have more to add to that?
So I think I mentioned it previously, but the steerco and having very strong governance means that anybody that wanted to access the data or participate in the partnership has to go through very strict criteria, which is laid down. And although I won't mention the name, but there was a very famous institution that were very excited about what we were doing. And unfortunately, they didn't meet some of the criteria. And as such, we had to decline. And I think that that is a testament to the fact that we are not here to commercialize the data. We're not here to do anything that is unethical or isn't for the greater good or the vision that we're trying to drive. And the fact that not all participation is necessarily good participation in terms of what the bigger picture is important. So having that governance and criteria, I think, is really, really important. And that was we see it day to day in the way that we carry out the SDGs activities, and also what is documented in our framework.
Great. That feels exhaustive, but I'd like to go to Omar for a moment. Omar, how did this look like from GSS's point of view, as far as the way the data was treated before it was sent out?
Yes, I think that has been well articulated by both Kathy and Angela. So let me just reinforce that with an example of when COVID hit Ghana in March 2020. And within a few days, the government declared a lockdown in Accra and Kumasi. And for the first time in the history of GSS, within 3 days, we were able to publish mobility estimate to give government a sense of how people were responding to the lockdown. And that was very instructive, because you could and appreciate that and we did it both in Accra and Kumasi and all the other regions. And we realized that that information was very useful in giving indication of how people respond to the lockdown to reduce the infections. And it is important to acknowledge here that this is aggregated information on how people move. And as it's already said by Kathy, is about data that the telecom companies are using for their billing purposes. And so this data become very useful to point out to where where people move to. And for instance, we were approached you realize that the first cases of COVID in Ghana were people who had traveled in. And so government approached us to request, because knowing that we're already working on this project, requested to use this data to do contact tracing. And then we said, no, unfortunately, the framework does not even make GSS have access to data at the individual level. We have only aggregated information, and even this aggregated information does not identify who is going where. It just gives a stream of, let's say, people moving from, let's say, region A to region B, or district A to district B. Like typically for me, who stay very far away from the city center, each day I commute and go back. And so you're able to get a sense of what proportion of the population is moving from my location to the city center, and what time do we go back? And so you see that this is not information that can identify individuals, and it is information, but it is information that is very useful in planning many interventions. Thank you.
Right. Insightful comments, everyone. Thank you very much. Kathy, I'm coming back to you. Omar spoke earlier on about how Flowminder came alongside GSS to build the capacity to help them understand the data sets and to be able to apply basic methods to produce routine mobility analysis. So can you tell us more about this capacity strengthening approach and how it's working to date?
Yeah, sure. So in the original phase of this initiative, we had big plans to come in and help people do exactly what we do. And we realized that we needed to go back a step and actually build a set of skills around the basics around some of the software and languages that we were using before then going to that step. So there's been a step around building, say, for example, Python skills. And then there's been a step around taking that information, that knowledge, and utilizing it in the context of processing CDRs. So we've gone on a journey where we've built certain software processing and language skills. We've then gone into looking at understanding the stuff we've talked about already today around legal agreements and software requirements and encryption and things like that, keeping the data safe and secure. we've gone through a detailed process through a series of training sessions that, because of COVID, had to happen online, but then last year we were able to go also in person for a series of workshops with Ghana Statistical Services and the set of trainees that have been nominated for this capacity building. And there we've been doing a series of capacity building sessions and then some troubleshooting, hand-holding, sorting out access to the VPN and using the API and these kind of practicalities, as well as the theory and the practice of processing the CDR data to get it to the point of being able to be used as indicators. So that analysis step of taking what's coming out from the infrastructure that's been set up, the aggregates, and actually utilizing it in different ways. And I said earlier, this year, we really are looking at investing in that data use side a lot more heavily. So we're still on the journey. Ghana Statistical Services trainees understand and know the processes that have gone in terms of getting the data from pseudonymized raw CDRs through aggregation to the indicators, and are now working with us to see how we can apply this in different contexts. There's also some other trainees who have been nominated as a sort of second cohort. And so I'm going to hand over to Omar, because he can talk about who has benefited from the training and what they've said about it. Omar.
Yes, yes, thank you, Kathy. And I think you have said it right. And one thing I need to point out is the training model that was used provided opportunity for the trainees to use the skills outside the CDR project. Some of the trainees have used the skills that were initially introduced to them in other operational areas of the National Statistical Office. And that has been very important for us because it opened up the opportunity for many people to now want to be part of this program and be part of the training process. And thankfully, in the second phase of the project, we realized that, and this is something that came out from the roadmap, that we need to strengthen the entire data ecosystem. And so with that realization, we said, okay, if we have to bring on board additional trainees, let us expand this to include staff of other MDAs. So we have people from Ghana Health Service, Ministry of Health, Immigration Service, the School of Public Health from the University of Ghana, and National Disaster Management Organization. And the idea is to ensure that at some point we have a pool of resources in country that can do a lot of analytical work with CDR. And of course, then they can also apply the skills elsewhere. So it's been a very important part of the work, and we really look forward to continue to build the capacity within the country.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. We are now at the Q&A session. But before we jump in, I'd like to give our panelists a chance to make one comment. So Angela, Kathy, and Omar, if you wanted attendees to remember just one thing about today's webinar and the Data for Good initiative, what would you like it to be? We'll start with Angela, and then we'll go to Kathy, and then Omar.
Okay, there are so many things, but one big thing is the importance of being present and taking the opportunity to do this. When this idea first came, it wasn't something that anyone would envisage would transform the way that community, society, even a whole country would use the information. No one could have predicted COVID. And I think that it just shows how innovation and the partnership and technology and working together and pushing through, even when it's very difficult, is so, so important. And linked to that point is around the fact that whilst you understand the benefit of the actual data and the partnership, I think the points that Kathy and Omar made around capacity building locally for the nation to be able to build these skills build these opportunities to do it yourself is also tremendously important. So I would encourage any mobile operator that is thinking about the idea, toying with the idea, maybe hasn't even thought about it, to definitely jump on board, because the more people that get involved, the more data sets we have, the more accuracy we have, and the more impact that we have, not just for Ghana, not just for the continent, but also globally.
Great. Kathy?
There again, like Angela said, there's so many things you could pick. I think I will focus on the importance of believing in what you're doing and having a passion that it will make a difference. Because I really think that that's partly the glue that's held this partnership together. We can see the potential. We know that there is lots of application out there that could benefit from understanding better how people are moving. We just need to unlock the data. And like Angela said, the more data, the better. So more MNOs coming on board would be fantastic. More NSOs getting these skills and unlocking that data in their countries would just be amazing. So the importance of sticking with it, committing to it, believing in what you're doing, having the passion, I think has been partly what's made this partnership successful in driving forward the use of this data for the benefit of Ghana.
And Omar?
Yes, national statistical offices, especially in the continent of Africa, know that our traditional data systems are not enough for us to monitor progress on the SDGs and progress on Agenda 2063 of the continent. And what we need to do is to look beyond our traditional data system. We should not be afraid to reach out to the private sector. The private sector are happy to provide, to give back to society. But once the National Statistical Office can clearly articulate what value we can put to the data being held by the private sector and work with them to build trusts, you cannot in fact, I cannot estimate what other values you would have. And a typical example is when we were conducting our 2021 census. It just took a phone call from me to Vodafone Ghana, and they gave us a platform to communicate to all their customers about the census, something that would have cost us so much money to do. But it's because of the trust and the relationship. And that is why I very much believe in Goal 17 of the SDGs that encourages all of us to look at achieving the SDGs through partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omar. And thank you, Kathy. And thank you, Angela. And now we'll go into the question and answer session. Let's take our first question now. Just a reminder that you can put your questions in the chat box and then we'll answer them one after the other. We already have a few questions and some of our panelists have touched on a few of them. There's one that's perhaps an easy one. Is Vodafone the only telco in Ghana? If no, does the Ghana Statistics Office unit merge CDRs from cell towers, from other telcos, or just from Vodafone? I think I'll go to Kathy first and then I'll come to Angela. Kathy, would you want to take a crack at that one?
Happy to, and happy to have others augment as well. So no, it's not the only telco. MTN, Airtel, Tigo are also present in Ghana, and we've actually had conversations with them led by Vodafone Ghana with regard to coming on board too. The challenge is what we talked about in this seminar with regard to how long it takes and the investment required, but they have shown interest. They are keen and enthusiastic. So I foresee a time when that will be possible. Just at the moment, the data supply is coming only from Vodafone Ghana, who just were a step ahead in terms of being super willing and enthusiastic about having their data used for good in Ghana. And I will say that alongside the development of the infrastructure, we've also been developing methodologies. And those methodologies have included the combination of this CDR data with other forms of data from Ghana Statistical Services that relate to census and survey in order to do what we're calling bias adjustment and enabling the scaling of the data to the wider population. So very happy to talk about that in a bit more detail. And actually, we're going to have another seminar where we talk a bit more about some of these methodologies and their application in the use case sphere. So please come along to that webinar as well. Oh, you're on mute, Richard.
Sorry. I was asking Angela whether she had something to add to that, but it looks like Kathy was quite exhaustive.
Yeah, I think Kathy mentioned it. I think one of the things people tend to expect is that telcos won't necessarily play nice on a project like this, but actually we are really, really keen for as many telcos to come together, because the more of us that come together to support this kind of project, the richer the information, the more impact that you can make for Mother Ghana and beyond. So we've gone through to the telecom chamber. There's a lot of excitement and a lot of interest from the other telcos, and we hope that soon we'll have the other mobile operators on board as well, so that we can get richer, more impactful data.
Great, that's great. Okay, Omar, I have one for you. The person said, could you kindly share some real life examples where the Data for Good project has made positive impact in Ghana and then in other countries? But maybe we'll switch quickly to Kathy after Omar has answered. So we talk about the other countries. But Omar, could you talk about Ghana for a moment?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I think in the opening statement, the government statistician did mention that His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, did acknowledge the contribution of this particular work in helping government interventions in COVID. And that couldn't be any better impact than that. And given that this is a process, and we need to ensure that as we tread this path, we are able to also look beyond what has already been done and which other areas that this work is supporting us. And so we currently are exploring many other uses with the health system, with the disaster management. In fact, we are even looking at supporting electricity distribution. We have had some initial engagement with them. For instance, once you fully understand the mobility pattern of people in the event of load shedding, you know which areas to turn off their lights at what times with minimum impact on the people and on their businesses. So these are all things that we have been working on, and we believe that as time goes on, we should be able to enumerate many more of the success stories. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Omar. Kathy, what about other countries? Have there been similar projects?
There have, and Flowminder and others are working in this space in a range of different countries. I'll give a couple of examples. We've been able to do analysis on data with regard to rapid movements of people in response to small or localized and sometimes larger scale displacements. So Flowminder in 2015, after the Nepal earthquake, was able to quite quickly release data about how people were moving and where they were moving to, which the UN system has acknowledged it did utilize in order to inform building the picture as to what was going on in the country. And that, as a result, one can assume has had some ripple effect in terms of the allocation of resources. Look, quantifying your impact is actually a challenge, and one that Flowminder is picking up, again, with Hewlett Foundation support, because we've been needing to get to the bottom of monitoring and evaluation where we're able to identify very clearly what impact are we having. Because we release data, we release reports, we release information. We hope, as I've said today already, that this is going to have a positive impact. We believe so. And we get anecdotal information. Definitely we've received this, but quantifying it is a different question. We've also done things like released reports about the potential for spread of cholera in Haiti as a result of certain sporadic outbreaks and where people are moving to, you can do a bit of predictive analysis around that. We've had a look at movements of people after an eruption of a volcano in DRC. We've also used this information not just during crisis, but in order to inform the decision-making around something like vaccination campaigns and how inflows and outflows of people to different locations could inform what vaccines are required, how many, etc., in different locations, or are there different times of year you needing to be thinking about campaigns? Are there ways you would tailor your campaigns based on population distribution and movement? So there are a number of different applications, and I will just make a plug here for flowgeek.org, which is our website where you can look a bit more about these applications and understand a little bit more what Flowminder and other organizations have done in this space in order to use CDRs and mobile phone data to inform decision-making, which is the crux of the issue. Thanks.
Great. Maybe you could just type the link in the chat section for everyone to access. Omar, I noticed that you answered a question about the staff strength and how you were structured. I wonder if you could shed some light on whether you had to restructure in order to be able to carry out the project. Did you have to restructure your team or your ways of working, perhaps?
Not really. It all boils down to what we believed through the data roadmap and after the assessment of Ghana's capacity for monitoring the SDGs. Once we're clear that there was the need for us to harness non-traditional data to augment the data produced for monitoring the SDGs, the same team has had to work around to ensure that we have this done. And let me mention here that, for instance, in 2017, Ghana could only report on 57 SDG indicators. And through all these activities and others, as we speak today, Ghana is able to report 124 indicators. And that tells you that we systematically working to increase the stock. Unfortunately, the staff strength at the National Statistical Office in Ghana has actually been dwindling. They have been going down. Way back in 2010, we were close to 800 staff. Today, as we have indicated, we are less than 300 staff, but we are still working to ensure that we deliver on public good.
That's great. That's great. I wonder if we can tackle the next one. Kathy, I'm coming to you. Chinazo says, are there issues of cell towers at boundaries or borders that make it difficult to analyze CDRs? Angela, you can chip in as well. I think this has to be a shared one between the two of you.
So that's a really good question and shows some understanding as to some of the challenges with the data. Yes, because you're reliant on cell towers. First of all, you need an updated list of the cell towers. Sometimes they can go down, during a crisis or a disaster. Sometimes they can be down and replaced with new ones. And if you don't know what those new ones' IDs are and where they're located, that can be an issue. But so yes, definitely you need to know everything you can about the cell towers in the network, and that is where Vodafone Ghana has been super helpful in providing updates around that for the analysis. And at borders, we often get asked this question: can you help us with cross-border analysis? Can you help us to understand movements, especially in relation to infectious disease related projects, etc.? And it's very challenging because you're only accessing a national level service provider, and you can look at some flows to cell towers near borders, but that might be in relation to people who live at the border. That might not be in relation to people who are crossing. And so disentangling some of those issues is one of the research projects that Flowminder is interested in kind of tackling further, because we know there's more work to be done in that space and to develop methodologies there. But it's absolutely right to say it's critical to know where your cell towers are and how they relate to your borders. And that doesn't just have to be national level borders. If what you're doing is trying to understand something at a district level, that administrative border also important for you to understand and to know where they're located relative to each other, the borders or boundaries and the cell towers. Angela, did you want to add anything on network?
And Kathy, I think you said it. I think that our networks team, alongside our IT team, provide those the locations of where our cell towers are, and based on the data that is going out, I guess that analysis can be done. So I think that you said it all. You said it all. We share locational data of our cell towers, which then feeds into the analysis that is done through Flowminder.
Great. Okay. Just a reminder to our attendees to keep sending their questions through the chat, and we'll answer them. Here's one by Wishi Shapiro. He's asking, is the mobile data able to be merged with traditional data like population census for further analysis? Omar, would you like to take that one?
Yeah. Yes, so thankfully, we are currently exploring one such use case where we are working, and if you understand how statisticians work, statisticians are cautious in adopting a methodology and going around with it and say, oh, this is the right way to go. Yeah, so we're currently exploring the use of CDR combining with census and survey, for instance, to look at poverty estimates. Because currently in Ghana, as in many other developing countries, our poverty estimates measurement is done once every 5 years or so, and we are unable to disaggregate the data to the lower level where decision making is usually done, like in the case of Ghana at the district level. Our estimates only are provided up to the regional level. So we are currently working and exploring the possibility of combining geospatial data, CDR, census data, and some other survey data to provide poverty estimates at the district level. And hopefully when this happens to, this is successful, we should be able to estimate poverty in each district, for instance, annually, which would be complementary to our poverty estimates that we produce from the living standard measurements. So yeah, so this is work in progress, and we are working on this. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go to a rather packed one. Sharon says, how does the project tackle the issue of ensuring long-term sustainability, especially in countries with rapidly evolving technology, in order to stay ahead of the curve? This is a rather Kathy?
I don't mind trying. So on sustainability as a topic, just generally, I can just at least start there. This has been a hot topic in the partnership for some time, because we really entered into the partnership wanting to be able to build a system that would be sustainable in the longer term. This isn't just a fly-by-night kind of a project. We're wanting to really change the data ecosystem, as Omar said earlier, and commit to making new ways of building statistics and creating statistics, something that's sustained. So we've had conversations around what each partner can bring to the table in the longer term, what can be contributed in kind, how can we mobilize resource financially to make things happen over time. With regard to this point around technology, yes, technology is constantly evolving, right? Sit here 20 years ago, we wouldn't necessarily be having this conversation. 20 years from now, I'm sure there are new things that will be on the agenda. I think it's fair to say, at least from our point of view, we maintain an awareness of what's going on in terms of development through our regular kind of understanding what's happening, being aware, looking at newsletters, attending conferences, and also sharing at conferences about what we're doing that is actually very novel and cutting edge. How to really kind of make ourselves always ahead of the curve, I don't really have an answer for that. I think that it is about being innovative and trying to maintain a kind of awareness of what could be innovative and how it might be applicable. There are times though when you can get distracted, right? You don't want to necessarily get distracted by something new and shiny if what you're trying to work on is get something over the line. And at the moment in Ghana, what Flowminder is focusing on is getting some really good demonstration of actual impact, as one of the attendees asked about earlier. Very clear, very obvious for people to see, really having data in use. So rather than continuing to innovate all the time, just at the moment, we're wanting to bed down what we already have. And no doubt there'll be some opportunities to innovate down the line. But in particular for this year, 2023, we're focusing on using the innovations we already have, continuing to innovate in the method development space because we need to, like I said earlier, on bias adjustment, and then making sure that we're demonstrating impact and usefulness. So I'm not sure I've fully answered the actual question, but those are some thoughts that came to mind from the question. Thank you very much.
Right,
and Richard,
thank you.
I just wanted to add to that, there's innovation in technology and sustainability that way, but also, as we mentioned before, around the commitment of the partners, whereby we might not know what the future holds, even as a tech company or as a tech co, we don't always know what is happening 25 years ahead, but the commitment from the partners is definitely there, that come what may, we know that this is something that we want to do. And then the second thing is sustainability in terms of capacity building locally. So one of the other things that we had to make sure as part of the framework is that whatever we were building, whatever we were doing, we had to make sure that the capability to do it themselves from a GSS point of view was there. So that's something that we keep on reiterating as part of the partnership, is that, look, even if our roles as partners change, or we step up or we step back, we need to make sure that GSS is able to take this above and beyond outside of the partnership. So I think that commitment and making sure that there's local capacity to keep this going is one of the other things outside of technology and innovation that we're also looking at.
Okay.
And if you permit me,
yes, Omar,
add this piece. For instance, when the STEARCO was setting up the guidelines around how we share the data externally, one of the important things that we put in there was to ensure that if any entity requests to use this data, one, they will need to be partnering a national institution to build capacity as part of the process of developing whatever use cases, and also the use of the data should relate to some kind of benefits to the population in Ghana.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Omar. Okay, one final question before we bring it to a close. This is by an anonymous person. What is the public acceptance of data for good in Ghanaian society? Does it raise any concerns about privacy breach? I don't know. Angela, could you attend to that, please?
Sure, I think, let me talk in general. So it's been a few years since the partnership came together. And actually, when I talk about our customers, the feedback that we've had about this has been largely positive. And I say largely positive because especially during the peak and the height of COVID, this was how we showed that we were partnering the country effort during that time. And people were very, very open, and we were applauded for the work that we were doing. I think the thing that we did before the COVID use case was there was a lot of education around how secure and how we use our customer data. Because at the end of the day, we're a tech co, and our customer data is paramount. And there are standards internally, there's GDPR, there are all the things that we put in place, as you heard earlier on when we were speaking, to ensure that our customers' data was secure anonymized, aggregated, and it's great for us on this platform to have that conversation, but we also had to go out and explain what that actually meant to the guy on the ground. A lot of people asked, okay, so if I'm going to the petrol station, will you see? No, we won't see. And you heard Omar earlier on talk about the fact that there are some use cases that we just don't use the data for. So that assurance and that trust that we were able to give our customers, I think we got back in advocacy and customer promotion when it came to actually asking our customers how they felt about it. So there was definitely people that were a little bit on edge, but once they understood this wasn't Big Brother, this wasn't spying, it wasn't anything like that, and they understood the use cases, e.g. the impact of what the data was being used for, which again is for the greater good. They realized that there was really nothing to worry about. So I think the sentiment was largely positive.
Great, thank you, Angela. That was supposed to be the last question, but I have one more. It says, what would you say to an MNO who's considering using their data for good, like Vodafone is doing? Where should they start? Should they approach the National Statistics Office in their own country? Kathy, would you take the lead on that?
I mean, I think I'm an advocate for that from the point of view that the statistical body in a country is really the place that official statistics gets produced, right? They have the mandate, they have the authority, they understand how to handle personal data well. I think that that's a sensible decision. In my experience, the people who reach out first are actually not usually the MNO. It's the NSO, the stats office folks who would really like to access the data are the ones reaching out. So, maybe we also benefited a lot from Vodafone Ghana's really brilliant kind of approach and attitude to sharing their data and making it available. I think really, if you are an MNO and you would like to, yes, absolutely, speak to the statistical office, ask them what they would use it for, ask them what processes they have in place, find out a little bit more about what their needs would be, how you would protect the privacy of your subscribers, what systems could be put in place. I personally and organizationally, we would advocate that the data still stays at the MNO, as we've described a bit today, just because that gives you a degree of control and privacy over the information in a way that what you're going to provide is information, but not necessarily individual data. And I think that's kind of critical. And I do think in the future, more and more MNOs will both be incentivized and also required to be sharing data. So I think MNOs do need to be thinking about this in the future. They sit on a very important data source, and opening up privately held data is something that we're not the only ones talking about it. It's a discussion point in the data world just generally. So that would be my thoughts. I'm sure Omar and Angela have others.
Yes, actually. I'd like to hear Angela's thoughts on that as well.
I think I said it when we just rounded up the panel. I would encourage MNOs to do it. I think that when you think about, yes, we're set up commercially to do commercial things, there has to be a bigger purpose. And the bigger purpose is something that could add to nation building, continent building, global building. And it's something that you have access to. It's something that you can control. And it's something that, you could even say it's a byproduct of what we do, what our day job is. So therefore, when you add that byproduct with purpose, you can get real impact. So I said this to Omar and Kathy, that there are very, very few things that telcos in the same market that are competitors actually agree on. And this is something that I would definitely advocate for MNOs to get involved in, because the output can only be good.
Thank you, Angela. And one final thought from you, Omar. If an NSO wanted to get involved and they reached out to an MNO, who would they contact first? How would they go about it?
Yes, so I think first and foremost, the the National Statistical Office need to be very clear on what they would want to use this data for. And thankfully, through this project, we have set a pace, and we've just shared resource to guide other MNOs, National Statistical Offices and MNOs who may want to travel the same path. Just to guide you on what you need in terms of the legal structure, infrastructure you need to set up with guidance. And we are happy to engage with you if you would need some advice from us, because we started this way back in 2017. So whatever it is, we have at least learned something that we can share with you. But I believe it is important because National Statistical Offices, especially in the Global South, our traditional data systems, we are how many years to the SDGs? Many of us have still not been able to monitor a
Oh dear, I think we've lost Omar.
Yes. Hello, Omar. Right. Okay.
institutions that hold this private data. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. We lost you for a bit there, but we got the gist of it. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for making themselves available and for this really interesting conversation. And as we've been saying, there's another webinar coming up soon, so please do watch out for that. And until then, we'll see you another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.